So I have 9 minutes. Earlier today, I received a prompting to make a list off the top of my head of, at a high level, a summary of the things that I have taught, the invitations that I have given so far. Today's December 7th, 2023. So I took about 3 minutes to do that. And this is the list I came up with, and I know that as soon as I finish recording this video, I will have a flood of things that I wish I had put on here that I didn't, or things to change that I put into this, but that's okay. Um, so often it's better to make an imperfect attempt at something than to do nothing. Of course, sometimes it's better to do nothing than to make an imperfect attempt. Anyway, I wanted to read these things because a recurring theme in my mind has been this idea of Jesus talking about, he's referring to the people, and he says, you're like children in the marketplace, and we've piped and you haven't danced, and we've lamented but you haven't mourned. And this is where we are so far. And in looking at this and in spending such an immense amount of time in writing the things that I've been writing, recording the things that I've been recording, as I look ahead to the, I don't know, maybe 70 hours of videos that are already uploaded to YouTube but are scheduled out into the spring, from here into the spring, about every 2 days. There's one set. And as I look out over the perhaps 10,000 pages of typed text that I have written but not published, and as I churn away at that to get it more prepared, closer to what it needs to be to share in a way that is as clear and direct and persuasive as I can make it, I look back at the things that we've already talked about. And I just don't see people doing these things. There may be folks who are doing this, but it's very clear to me that people have not seen the importance of what we've talked about. And this is in itself a recurring theme, but it's just not good enough. The fact is that the flood is coming. Well, I say flood, it's not water, it's fire. The fire is coming, and you are not nearly fireproof enough even for the flames that are already burning you. And you don't see it because you don't have sufficient awareness to see it. But you've put yourself in places, you're living in ways where you're subject to consequences that are far worse than you realize. And if you had any clue about how bad it actually is, you would have every motivation in the world to change. And so it's a because I've shared with you sufficient reasons already, it's an issue of unbelief. Now, the good news is these reasons are going to cascade, but the bad news is so are the consequences. And already, the vast majority of people who watch this channel are in a place where, as people come who are prepared for these things and who respond appropriately to them, you will be displaced in your access to them. This is not going to last forever. Just being very specific, the internet won't last forever. Your discretionary time and your money will not last forever. These are things we've talked about in the past. As all this comes to a close, you're going to be stuck at wherever you are in terms of access to these things, and it's not enough. There's something we're preparing for. It's a series of some things. It's the end of the world. It's a series of events that have been discussed in Scripture over many pages and a very long time. So what's this list? It's on your screen. So I'll just try to run through this in the few minutes I have left. Again, this is my summary of, at a high level, of the things that I think that I've been teaching all this time. Live up to what you have in order to receive more. God is very much the same as he's always been, and you can have a remarkable relationship with him, as remarkable as anyone else in the history of the world. He's not a respecter of persons. He's completely impartial. And so if you obtain and live the same laws as the ancients, you'll have the same relationship with God that they did. So the first step in receiving more is living up to what you already have. And that means you need to stop sinning. It's very possible to stop sinning. It's possible to live without sin. It's possible to live in complete alignment with what you sincerely believe the Lord would do in your place all the time. And nothing but that. You can completely match your behavior to your understanding of what Jesus would do in your place. Once you get there, and I long for the day when I can give you a long list of people who are there. Once you get there, you shift into learning everything else you can about him, and he will teach you much more about himself. Love one another. I've given you this definition of love as what you're willing to suffer for the benefit of others. It's an extraordinarily valuable and powerful definition. And I've invited you to suffer more for greater benefit of others. This is the definition of love your neighbor. The Lord said, love your neighbor. He said, love one another. He wants us to love others as he has loved us. We are charged to do everything we can for the benefit of the world. I've taught you that God's voice is the voice of improvement. The Lord was serious when he charged us to be perfect. That is, to echo what we said earlier, to live in complete accordance with how you believe he would in your place. Part of living up to the opportunities for improvement that we have is making life much more intentional than most people live it. To actually have a written plan for your life that you've written and that you take responsibility for, you really buy into, you live up to, and you change it when it needs to be changed for whatever reason. It's a contract with yourself and with God. Make a life plan, live it, optimize your life for the greatest benefit of the world. If you do it passively, you'll never do what you could if you did it explicitly, intentionally. Choose what is best in all things. Learn more about reality, the laws of cause and effect, what options exist, what they're worth. And as you go through learning more and more about this, just make sure you're living according to what you understand. Don't just float through the river of life. You need to go upstream. You need to paddle against the current to get to the best places. I've talked a lot about what is coming. I'm going to talk a lot more about it. But the point, I suppose, is that the demands of the future will be greater than the demands of the present. If you're optimizing your whole life based on how things were in the past, you're going to find that you're never enough to face the challenges of today. You have to be better than normal to even just be okay later. That's not about survival. If that's your motive, just hang up the phone right now and move on with your life. It's about being better to be stronger to help other people who have not had the opportunities you've had. That's why God has put you into the place that you're in. That's why he's blessed you with what he has, to see if you're willing to use it to help others. And now you have to do that through the lens of faith to prepare for a time that's not yet here. You have to do everything you can, which will be far more than what it seems like you need to do. It's about doing all the good that you can. I've invited you to pick up the pace. I've said that more than once, and I'll probably say it a lot more than once in the future. You need to increase the amount of time you have available for doing the things that God tells you to do that you didn't plan on. You also need to expand the slice of your life that's occupied in learning and living the gospel in ways you do plan on. This gets back to your life plan. If you live passively, you're going to spend an enormous amount of resources on things that really don't matter. You have to be more efficient. We talked a lot about jobs and a bit about money. There's a lot more of that coming because it's a very practical thing. But I've invited you to think about better ways of earning money, more money in less time, and in more righteous ways. And that's one we'll dive into some more later. I've invited you to think about ways you can reduce your household expenses to maybe match it more closely to what you deserve and need and less about what you can get away with. I've explicitly invited you to try to find a job where you're working for someone that's wiser than you. That's very important. Almost everyone is not in that situation, and it's always a good time to look for a better situation. I've said a lot about children, so for those of you who are or will be parents, I've invited you to live a life worthy of emulation by your children. We've talked a lot about helping your children design a life, an abundant life, and using your time with them that you have while they're in your home and thereafter to guide them to better outcomes than they would have if it weren't for you. I've explicitly invited you many times to do what you can to get your kids out of public schools, or at least mitigate the influence that that has on them. And then finally, we've spoken quite a bit about location, about moving to places that better fit what's obviously the situation in the world and what's likely to be the situation to come. And so one explicit piece of advice is to move to more rural places. So with that, I'm a little over time, but I hope that you take these things seriously. Maybe you could make your own list of these things that we've talked about. And I hope that those of you who are consuming these videos, you're actually putting them into place, not just listening to them or reading the books, but making changes as you find sufficiently persuasive reasons to do so.